Hi friends, I'm so glad that you have joined me tonight as we chat about guided reading for the next couple of weeks. This is week one of a four-part series, and tonight we're going to be diving in and talking about all of the things that happen before we bring kids to the table. So before we get started, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I know there are several of you who are new around here. My name is Amanda, and I blog at mrsrichardsonsclass.com. I taught kindergarten and first grade for several years before staying at home with my children and taking on Mrs. Richardson's class full time. So I work on that. I create and sell teaching resources online. My Teachers Paid Teachers store is Amanda Richardson. And I also provide professional development for all things balanced literacy and a little bit of science. So, since we're talking about guided reading tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit first about my guided reading story. So my first year of teaching was quite a doozy. I was hired as a first grade teacher, and in October, I was moved to kindergarten because our first grade classes weren't making. So, I felt like that was really late in the school year and it was really kind of crazy, but I was moved to kindergarten in October and it ended up being the best thing ever. It was a blessing that I didn't know was even coming my way. So my district that I worked in really valued the balanced literacy approach to teaching reading. And because of that, and because I did not have a strong background in balanced literacy in college, I was given a sweet old kindergarten teacher who was retired and was coming back to be a consultant. So she came into my classroom and she modeled every single aspect of balanced literacy for me for several weeks, which was amazing. And through that process and during that time, I just truly fell in love with guided reading. I just saw quickly that it was a valuable time in my classroom where students were coming to my table. I was getting to coach them through reading. And I realized that it was a great time for me to get to know my kids, encourage them, and just really coach them. And then I was blessed to work at another wonderful school where I had a great team of teachers, one who was a balanced literacy coach herself. And she just provided so much insight for me all of the time. So that's a little bit of my background and where I came with guided reading. I get emails all of the time from teachers who just say things like, nobody does guided reading in my school, or I want to do it and I just don't know how to get started. And I love that I'm able to say, oh my gosh, that was so me my first year of teaching. I just felt like I was swimming, trying to keep up with things and trying to figure things out. And I'm so grateful for all of the teachers that I had who just came alongside of me and coached me through some things, and just great people who I learned a lot of valuable things from. So, if that's you tonight, and if you have been teaching guided reading for a long time and you're like, I have got this, I'm just looking for a few more tips to get this thing, just to make my practice better, then you're in the right place. And if you are a first year teacher or a new teacher, or guided reading is just not your jam, that's totally okay, and you're still in the right place. So tonight I'm going to talk a lot about all of the things that happen as we prepare to bring the kids to our table. So many times when I walk into classrooms and I see teachers doing guided reading, when it is going smoothly, I know that that has not happened without a lot of work up front. I also know that when my principal came into my room, I just always was praying like, okay, kids, you know that we have practiced and learned so many things about what this time at the table should look like. So please just remember. So I have totally been there, and I just want to talk about all of those things that happen as we prepare for the kids to come to our table. So we're going to talk about three things tonight. I'm going to focus on three things. The first is preparing our kids. The second is preparing yourself. And the third is preparing our materials for our guided reading time. So first, let's talk about preparing our kids. I really think this might be one of the most important things that we do as we prepare for our guided reading time, especially with kindergarten and first grade students. Sometimes they simply just don't know what to expect. Other times, if you are teaching a grade level that is older than you, if you're teaching a grade level that's older than kinder or first, the students have had someone who wasn't you the year before. So oftentimes what happens is their guided reading routine just doesn't look the same as yours. So, I'm sorry. So with that in mind, just remember that you need to go over lots of things. So here's some things that I did in my classroom. The first thing we did as I prepared my kids was to create expectations. In my classroom, it was usually a class meeting where I would tell them all about what was going to happen at my table. I would get them excited. I would be super excited. And I would just explain to them that this time was very important. That my expectation was that they came to the table to learn. We were learning at my table. And oftentimes, yes, we would play games and we would do so many fun activities. However, they still were learning. And so I wanted them to know, yes, we're going to have fun, but we're also going to be learning during that time. The second thing you can do to prepare them is to create guidelines. So we had 3 basic rules during our guided reading time. So I'm going to tell those to you briefly, and then I'm going to expand on them a little bit. The first was blood, barf, and bathroom. And while barf is not my favorite word, we called it the 3 Bs, and that was super simple for the kids to remember. So they could interrupt me at my table if somebody was bleeding, if somebody had thrown up, or if they needed to use the restroom. And the way they asked to use the restroom was just by using a sign language R. And so that was our quiet way to ask permission to use the restroom in our classroom. And sometimes if we had a bathroom in our classroom, they didn't have to ask permission, and they knew that. I have a little poster that helped us remember that. And I hung it in our classroom, and it's a freebie on my blog, and I'll post the link when I'm done. Our second rule we had was ask 3 before me. And this rule, with this rule, we had to do lots and lots of practice because, as you know, and as you may have experienced, oftentimes in my classroom, kids would just walk around and ask 3 friends whether or not they got an answer the first time or not. And many times they would get an answer the first time. They just thought, well, I'm just going to go talk to 2 other friends because I have a free ticket to do that. So that was our second rule, ask 3 before me. And then our third rule was roaming fees apply. I don't know how many of you remember cell phones and when we had to pay roaming fees on our cell phones, but I remember that my parents often were like, hey, you can't make a phone call because you're in a roaming area. You're going to have to pay a roaming fee in this area. So I have used that rule from the first year of teaching with my kids, and I just kind of explained that that meant if they were going to roam around in the classroom and not stay at their workstation, that they were going to have to pay me. Sometimes that meant they just had to come sit in timeout in my classroom for a minute or so. Sometimes it meant that I was going to give them an extra job to clean up something in our classroom or organize something for me that needed organized later in the classroom. But those were our 3 rules: blood, barf, and bathroom, ask 3 before me, and roaming fees apply. Along with all of those, something that I always tried to keep in mind when I set up my classroom at the beginning of the year was that where I sat my table, well, wherever I placed my table, I needed to be able to see every single space in my classroom because my students were spread out for literacy stations. We'll talk about those in the next couple of weeks a little bit more, but the biggest thing was that I needed to make sure was that I could see where everyone was. And so I could catch them if they were roaming. I could catch them if they were not staying on task, that sort of thing. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, so with preparing their kids, we create those expectations and we created guidelines, and then we would create and practice procedures. And that's huge, guys. At the beginning of the year, we have procedures for everything, for lining up, for going to the bathroom. We have procedures for everything. And so we would have procedures for coming to our guided reading table, and we would practice those. We would practice coming from the carpet to the table, and then we would practice coming from a workstation to the table too. And a lot of times we did that first. We would practice as I introduced it, but then we would practice the week before I really started guided reading groups. When I would do assessments is when we would truly practice them coming to my table the right way. So that was really important, and it really just helped our guided reading time move smoothly. So speaking of assessments, you will need to make sure that you have assessed your kids and you have their beginning guided reading level before you bring them to the table. That's part of preparing your kids. and really, I guess, part of preparing yourself too, so that you know a place to begin. Many schools have leveling kits. I've used a DRA leveling kit and a Rigby leveling kit. And then one year, the last school I worked at for several years, we did not even have leveling kits. And so I created one with our adoption series. So even though I didn't use our Basil reading series, there were books provided, and I was able to create an assessment kit using what was provided for us. Basically, I just needed that baseline, and I needed something to come back to later in the year, for the middle of the year and for the end of the year, that I could use to have that to assess them, and that was going to be a fair assessment for everyone too. So those are all the things for preparing our kids. We're going to chat a little bit about preparing yourself. When I think about preparing myself for guided reading, of course I'm thinking about like all of the routines, all of the to-dos that I have, that I know I have to get in place before I bring them to the table. But I also know that I have to mentally prepare myself, because what I have noticed is that at the beginning of the year, after I have spent 6 weeks implementing workstations, we've talked about expectations at my table, we've talked about what's expected of the students when they're not at my table particularly, but they're at workstations, is that I have to remind myself that they are still learning what to do at my table. So I have to remind myself that it takes time to get those groups going, for them to remember, oh, they come to my table and they bring their book. Oh, when they come to my table, they need to come quickly. I have to mentally prepare and know that I am still coaching the kids during those first couple of weeks of actually implementing guided reading, so that they know what is expected. Okay, so preparing the kids, preparing yourself mentally, and then preparing our materials. So now that the kids are ready and you are mentally ready, let's just chat a little bit about preparing your guided reading materials. I like to keep everything in tubs or baskets behind my guided reading table. So I oftentimes had a bookshelf and I would have a basket. I like to use those white Sterilite baskets that you can purchase at Walmart or on Amazon. Sometimes you can find them at the Dollar Tree even. And I would put a label on them, group 1, group 2, group 3. And in that basket, I would put all of the supplies that I needed for that group for the whole week. If I was able to prepare for that group for the whole week, I really liked to do that. It just made everything so much easier. Another thing that I've done before I moved to the baskets, I used those stacking Sterilite drawers. I think they're by Sterilite. Oftentimes you can find them on sale during the summer at Target or at Walmart too. And I would have a drawer for each group. Materials that I always had at my fingertips were sentence strips, magnetic letters, sight word flashcards, blank index cards, reading glasses like these. I like to get these at the Target dollar spot. Those are so much fun for my kids. Reading pointers. I like to use just these. These are just drink stirrers I got from the Target dollar spot, and oftentimes they change them out seasonally, and so that would be lots of fun too. And then these are also fun to be a reading pointer too. They're just like little wiggly eyes. These I found at the Target dollar spot, but I also know, these I ordered on Amazon, but at Valentine's Day, I did see some in the Target dollar spot. Pencils, I always like to have pencils prepared for when we're going to do writing after our guided reading time, because I don't want them to have to chase down pencils at their tables or their desks. Dry erase boards, erasers, markers, alphabet charts, or strips. I would use a strip like this. You can kind of see it for my guided reading time. And we're going to talk more about this next week as we dig into the guided reading lesson. Or an alphabet chart that's like this is simple and great for them to use too. And then, of course, books. I always would have my guided reading books right there so I could grab them easily. And like I said, we'll talk next week more about the actual guided reading lesson and what that looks like. I also like to keep all of my forms, my running records, lesson plans, my guided reading notes that I would take from each group all together in a binder. And here's what my binder looks like. And inside, I just liked to keep everything. It was so nice to have everything together and all in one place too. This just made everything so much easier when it came to planning and even gathering data for my guided reading, gathering data for RTI purposes. Everything was just always right there. I could flip, I could easily see what we covered last time, what our teaching strategy was last time, and then easily know like, okay, well, this is what we need to work on next time. It was so nice to have everything just all in one place for each group, and just for guided reading time as a whole. So I see, oh, Cindy, thanks. Cindy said that the drawers are super cheap at Sam's. That's a great place to find those stacking stairlight drawers to use for organization. Yvonne, I taught kinder in first grade. I taught mainstream and I taught two-way dual language as well. I've always taught English language learners though. So yeah, I'm going to hang around a little bit longer, and I'm going to hang around a little bit longer, not live, but in the comments. And so if you guys have any more questions, I would love to chat. I'm happy to answer them. Oh, let's see, Emily, I love that I could just, yes, it's so great to have all your data in one place. And Danielle, yes, I do. I'm glad you asked. This binder is available for purchase in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. And I can also drop a link in the comments when we're done too. There are lesson plan templates and I show pictures of how I organize it and everything. It truly has been like the key to my organization and keeping like all of my teacher pages and papers organized during my guided reading time. So yeah, thanks so much for hanging out, guys. Join us next week. Next week we'll be chatting on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, but at the same time, 8:15, and we're going to be chatting about the guided reading lesson and what that time looks like. So thanks so much for joining me. I hope you'll have a great evening. Bye.